Good evening, everyone. My name is Joe Wong.
Like me, our next guest earned a PhD in molecular biology before becoming a comedian.
He'll perform for the president at the 66th Annual Radio Television Correspondents' Dinner in Washington, D.C.
My next guest is a stand-up comedian and host of my favorite late-night show in China, Is It True? Please welcome all the way from Beijing, Joe Wong.
I still think China is the best country for a young comic to start.
I feel like this is really a listening comprehension class. I feel like 但是过了那个名6、7没有。We might as well just do the show Chinese.
People always ask me, hey, what's the difference between American humor and Chinese humor? If you dig deep enough, they're very similar. You know, even the techniques we use are very similar. It's just that the language and cultural subcontext are different. And also the audiences are kind of different too. Like in America, the crowds tend to have a few drinks before they watch a comedy show. So they're already loosened up by the time the comedian walks on the stage. But in China, the audience almost never drink any alcohol. So it takes a little bit more time to warm up the crowd.
想问飘你在哪里？请看看你的头飘起。
I think the online shows really promoted the offline shows here in China, especially in the past 2 years. And before that, I don't even know how to describe stand-up comedy to a Chinese audience. I used to do stand-up comedy shows and people would raise their hand and ask. I was like, oh, they probably have a comedy-related question. But instead they would ask, hey, do you think my grandson should go to America to study? Okay, I can answer that too. Yeah, so, but now it's getting so popular, it's people rarely ask those stuff anymore. Online shows basically has their own reality. It's within the studio and most of the jokes are written by writers. Because it's a variety show or 综艺, you gotta bring in all the elements that you can find to make it popular, to make it more palatable to the audience. So they try to maximize its appeal. So whatever is popular, whatever works, they will bring them on stage. But in the theater, you don't have that. You know, you basically just rely on yourself to make the audience member laugh.
直到昨天我给杨门讲了这个段子，我说你觉得怎么样？他听完以后他说杨丽，你在挑战男人的底线。我听完以后特别震惊，我说男人还有底线呢？
If a female comic makes fun of male in general, I think it's okay. You know, it's just good fun. As a matter of fact, she was one of my favorite comedians in China, because as a female comic, sometimes she would deliver the punchline in a way that I would not anticipate. So I found that quite amusing. The rule of thumb is you should always punch up. You know, comedy sometimes is a weapon, and you should use this weapon to challenge authorities or just ridicule people who are doing harm to others. There are people who are advantaged, privileged in the society. There's also the disadvantaged and disenfranchised. Comedy's job is not to put these disadvantaged or disenfranchised people further down. And in most societies, women is the less advantaged. Let's just put it this way. America has gone through very similar stuff before. You know, whether or not it's female comics. When I first started doing stand-up comedy in America, there wasn't that many female comedians. But after 2011, there are more and more female stand-up comedians on stage telling things that women care more about. So that's a very interesting trend. And I believe that there will be more and more female comedians in China too.
But my son has a good point, though. Nobody in America, especially a person of color, is exactly the color they're assigned. You know, like this is not exactly yellow; it's kind of brown. A black person is not exactly black; they're kind of brown. So we're pretty much all different shades of Mexicans.
Sometimes people just like things handed to them so they can have an immediate response, and that is fine. Just there are two different styles of comedy. Even in America, there are like very physical comedians. You know, they will make funny noises or some body movement, and the crowd will immediately laugh. But then there are also other comedians who tend to say things that makes people think first and then laugh. So there's always different types of comedians. But unfortunately, in comedy, unlike in music, there's not a lot of fine distinctions between different styles. You know, like in music, you have jazz, you have hip hop or rock and roll. People will not confuse them. But in comedy, there's no clear boundaries. So sometimes people say, oh, why do you laugh at this joke or not that? But then just because there's different types of jokes, different styles.
I feel that it's necessary for us to say this on record, that there is stand-up comedy in China.
I still think China is the best country for a young comic to start because there are actually more comedy shows than there are comedians right now. So comedians in cities like Beijing or Shanghai or Shenzhen, sometimes they can do 4 or 5 different shows in a day. They just go from one comedy club to another because there are so many opportunities to perform. I think you just have to stick to it. It's a marathon. You know, I know it's a cliche to say, oh, it's a marathon, it's not a sprint, but it's true. And it just takes many years to hone your material, find your own voice. And in terms of making a living, a lot of young comics can make a pretty decent living, like 6 months to a year into stand-up comedy. So it's a pretty good situation right now, mostly because it's so new and there's so little competition right now. I'm still working on a knowledge-based variety show with different platforms. That's what I'm pitching right now. I can't disclose too much, but then I feel that comedy not only has a role in entertainment, but also has a role in spreading knowledge. So I'm just hoping that we can create a variety show in China that makes people laugh, while in the meantime they can learn something.